The whispers started the moment Georgia Dalton stepped into Henderson's general store, and by the time she reached the counter, 3 women had already turned their backs on her with that particular brand of cruelty only respectable townswomen could manage. 25 years old and never been courted proper, Mrs. Henderson said loud enough for half of Chico, California to hear. It is not natural, I tell you. Something must be wrong with her. Georgia's fingers tightened on the list her father had written before the fever took him 3 weeks ago, the paper crinkling in her grip. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight as a lodgepole pine, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only made the vultures circle closer. Maybe she is saving herself for some fancy gentleman from San Francisco, another woman tittered. Though what gentleman would want a girl who has been running that ranch alone like some kind of man? The third voice dropped to a stage whisper. I heard tell she sleeps in the barn sometimes, keeping watch over the livestock herself. No wonder no decent man will have her. Georgia placed her father's list on the counter with deliberate care. Mr. Henderson at least had the decency to look uncomfortable as he glanced at the items she needed. Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition for the rifle. The essentials for survival, nothing more. The Dalton ranch had been struggling since her mother passed 5 years ago, and her father's death had pushed it to the edge of complete collapse. I will have these items ready for you in a moment, Miss Dalton, Henderson mumbled, his eyes sliding away from hers. Take your time, Georgia replied, her voice steady despite the heat creeping up her neck. The bell above the door chimed, and the store fell silent in a way that made Georgia's instincts prickle. She turned slightly, just enough to see who had entered, and found herself staring at a man who seemed to have been carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. Long dark hair fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his face bore the weathered tan of someone who spent more time under open sky than under roof. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of years hauling timber and wrestling nature into submission. He wore buckskin pants and a worn shirt that had seen better days, and his boots were caked with the kind of mud that came from high country trails. His eyes, sharp and amber brown like a hawk's, swept the store and landed on Georgia with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. The women who had been so bold in their mockery suddenly found pressing reasons to examine bolts of fabric on the far side of the store. Even Mrs. Henderson scurried toward the back room, leaving only her husband to deal with this newcomer. "Zachary Hawthorne," Henderson said, and there was something between respect and fear in his voice. "Did not expect to see you down from the mountains this time of year." "Need supplies," Zachary said simply. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, as if he spent more time talking to trees than people. "And heard tell there might be trouble brewing with the Crimson Creek gang moving through the territory." Georgia's attention sharpened at that. She had heard rumors of the gang, outlaws who preyed on isolated ranches and small settlements. Her ranch sat far enough from town that it would be an easy target, especially with just her and old Miguel, the ranch hand, who was pushing 70 and could barely mount a horse anymore. "They have been keeping north of here," Henderson said nervously. "No real trouble yet." "Yet?" Zachary repeated, and the word hung in the air like a threat. His gaze returned to Georgia, and this time he studied her with open curiosity. She met his eyes without flinching, tired of being treated like something fragile or shameful. If this mountain man wanted to stare, let him stare. "You are Dalton's daughter," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Georgia replied. "Heard he passed. My condolences." The simple statement, delivered without false sentiment or pity, struck her more deeply than all the flowery sympathy the town had offered. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. "You running that ranch alone now?" "I have Miguel," she said, then wondered why she felt the need to explain anything to this stranger. Something that might have been concern flickered across Zachary's weathered features. "Miguel Santos? Good man, but he has to be near 70 by now." 68, Georgia corrected, and still worth 3 of most men half his age. The corner of Zachary's mouth twitched, almost but not quite a smile. "No doubt. But that ranch is a lot of work for 2 people, one of them near 70 and the other." "The other what?" Georgia challenged, her chin lifting. "A woman. I've been working that land since I could walk. I know every fence line, every water source, every head of cattle. I can shoot straight, ride hard, and I do not need anyone's pity or protection." This time he did smile, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and revealing something almost boyish beneath the mountain man exterior. Was going to say one of them running on grief and stubbornness, but I admire your fire. Before Georgia could formulate a response, Henderson returned with her supplies bundled and ready. She paid with coins counted out carefully, aware that every cent mattered now. As she gathered her packages, Zachary stepped forward. "Let me help you with those. I can manage. Never said you could not, but I am heading out anyway, and there's no sense in pride when practical help is offered." Georgia wanted to refuse, but the truth was the supplies were heavy and her wagon was 3 buildings down. She gave a curt nod, and Zachary gathered the bulk of the packages with an ease that made them look weightless. The afternoon sun hit them as they stepped outside, and Georgia was aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. The gossips would have a field day with this, seeing her with the mountain man. Let them talk. They talked anyway. "That's my wagon," she said, pointing to the weathered buckboard hitched to her father's old mare, Constance. Zachary loaded the supplies with efficient movements, securing them so they would not shift during the ride. Up close, Georgia could see the scars on his hands, the kind that came from hard living and harder fights. She also noticed he moved with a grace unusual for a man his size, each motion deliberate and controlled. "Thank you," she said when he finished. He leaned against the wagon, studying her in that intense way again. "Your ranch is about an hour north of here, right? Up near the foothills?" "About that, yes. Isolated territory. Beautiful, but isolated." "I know my own land, Mr. Hawthorne." "Zachary," he corrected. "And I am not trying to insult you, Miss Dalton, just stating facts. If the Crimson Creek gang is moving through this area, isolated ranches are going to be their first targets. They look for places where they can raid quick and disappear before anyone can raise an alarm." Fear touched Georgia's spine with icy fingers, but she kept her expression neutral. "Are you trying to frighten me?" "I am trying to warn you," he said bluntly. "There is a difference. Well, consider me warned. I have a rifle, and I know how to use it. One rifle against a gang of 6 or 7 men would not do much good, no matter how straight you shoot." "Then what exactly are you suggesting I do?" Frustration leaked into her voice. "Abandon the ranch? It is all I have left. That land has been in my family for 23 years. My parents are buried there. I cannot just walk away." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face as if looking for something. Finally, he straightened from the wagon. "I have a cabin about 2 hours northeast of your place, up in the high country. Been living there for near about 8 years now, trapping and hunting. Know these mountains better than most men know their own homes." "That is fascinating, but I fail to see what it has to do with me." "I could keep an eye on your place," he said. "Check in regular, make sure you are managing all right. Having someone around who knows how to handle trouble might discourage the kind of men who prey on women alone." Georgia's first instinct was to refuse. She had spent her entire life being told she needed a man's protection, that she was not capable of managing on her own. Every suitor who had ever darkened her doorway had looked at her ranch with greedy eyes, seeing opportunity rather than the woman herself. She had turned them all away, preferring honest loneliness to the prison of a loveless marriage. But Zachary Hawthorne was not offering marriage or looking at her ranch like it was his for the taking. He was offering help, plain and simple, and Georgia was practical enough to know when pride became foolishness. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You do not know me?" "I knew your father a bit. He helped me out once, few years back, when I had a run-in with a mountain lion that left me torn up bad. I made it to your ranch, and he and Miguel patched me up, let me recover in their barn for near 2 weeks. Never asked for payment, never told anyone about it." He paused. "I believe in paying debts." The memory surfaced in Georgia's mind. She had been away, staying with her aunt in Sacramento while her mother recovered from pneumonia. Her father had mentioned helping an injured trapper, but she had never met the man herself. "That was you?" she asked. "That was me. Your father was a good man. Seems right to help his daughter if she needs it." Georgia studied him, this mountain man with his weathered face and careful words. There was something solid about him, something that felt trustworthy in a way she could not quite explain. Maybe it was the way he had spoken to her like an equal, without the condescension or false charm she had grown to expect from men. Maybe it was simply that she was tired, bone-deep tired, of carrying everything alone. "I suppose having someone check in now and then would not be the worst thing," she said slowly, "but I will not have you thinking I am some helpless female who needs constant watching over." "Would not dream of it, Miss Dalton." "Georgia," she corrected, surprising herself. "If you are going to be coming around, you might as well use my given name." That almost smile appeared again. "Georgia it is, then. And I will not have people getting the wrong idea about this arrangement," she added firmly. "I have enough trouble with gossip as it is." "I do not give much thought to what people say," Zachary replied. "Spend most of my time with trees and deer. They are not much for gossip." Despite everything, Georgia felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It felt strange after weeks of grief and worry, but not unwelcome. "All right then, Zachary. I would appreciate your help if the offer is genuine." "It is." He touched his hat brim again. "I will ride out your way tomorrow, take a look at your property, see what might need reinforcing. Meanwhile, you keep that rifle loaded and your doors barred at night." "I'm not a fool." "Never thought you were." He stepped back from the wagon. "One more thing. Those women in the store, the ones who were talking about you." George's jaw tightened. "What about them?" "They are jealous," he said simply. "You have got land, independence, and enough spine to stand on your own. That frightens small-minded people. They will try to tear you down because building you up makes them look at their own choices." The words hit Georgia like a splash of cool water on a hot day. She had spent so long internalizing the mockery, wondering what was wrong with her, that she had never considered the talk might say more about them than about her. "Thank you for that," she said quietly. Zachary nodded once, then turned and walked back down the street with that same fluid grace. Georgia watched him go, something shifting in her chest that she could not quite name. Then she climbed onto her wagon, gathered the reins, and began the long ride home. The Dalton Ranch sat in a valley carved by centuries of water flow, with the Sierra Nevada foothills rising like protective walls on three sides. The land rolled in gentle waves of golden grass, dotted with oak trees that provided shade for the cattle during the brutal summer months. A creek ran along the eastern boundary, fed by mountain snowmelt and never fully dry, even in the worst drought years. George's grandfather had chosen this spot in 1854, when California was still wild and full of promise. He had built the original cabin with his own hands, then died of cholera before he could see his first harvest. Her father had expanded the ranch, adding a proper house, a barn, corrals, and slowly building a herd that had once numbered nearly 200 head. Now the herd was down to maybe 80 cattle, scattered across land that was too much for two people to properly manage. Fences needed mending, the barn roof leaked in 3 places, and the house itself bore the neglect of the past few months when Georgia's every waking hour had been devoted to nursing her dying father. Miguel met her as she pulled the wagon up to the house. He was a small man, lean and weathered like an old leather strap, with silver hair and dark eyes that missed nothing. He had worked for the Dalton family since before Georgia was born, and she trusted him more than anyone else in the world. "You were gone a long time," he said, already reaching for the supplies. "Trouble in town?" "The usual," Georgia replied, climbing down from the wagon seat. "Women with too much time and too little kindness." Miguel muttered something in Spanish that was probably profane, then switched back to English. "They are fools. You are worth 10 of any of them." Zachary Hawthorne said something similar. Miguel's hand stilled on a bag of flour. "Zachary Hawthorne? The mountain man? You know him?" "I know of him. He was the one your father helped, the one mauled by the lion." Miguel's eyes sharpened with interest. "What did he want with you?" Georgia explained the conversation as they carried supplies into the house. Miguel listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. "This is good," he said when she finished. "I have been worried, Miss Georgia. The ranch is too much for us alone, and if there is trouble coming—" He trailed off, but Georgia understood. Miguel would fight to his last breath to protect her and the ranch, but he was realistic about his limitations. "I told him he could come check on things," Georgia said. "He will be here tomorrow." "Bueno, this is very good." That night, Georgia lay in her childhood bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around her. The creak of wood, the rustle of wind through the oak tree outside her window, the distant lowing of cattle. These sounds were home, woven into the fabric of her being as surely as her own heartbeat. But tonight there was something else, too. The memory of amber eyes and a deep voice, of a man who had looked at her and seen capability rather than failure. Georgia told herself it meant nothing, that Zachary was simply honoring a debt to her father, but some small part of her wondered what it might be like to have someone truly see her, not as a burden or an oddity, but as herself. She fell asleep with that thought curling warm in her chest, and for the first time in weeks she did not dream of death and loss. True to his word, Zachary arrived the next day, just after noon. Georgia heard the hoofbeats and emerged from the barn where she had been mucking stalls, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She knew she looked a mess, her dress dusty and her hair escaping its braid, but if she had learned anything in 25 years, it was that ranch work did not wait for vanity. Zachary rode a big roan gelding that looked as solid and capable as its owner. He dismounted with easy grace and let the horse drink from the water trough while his gaze swept over the ranch with the sharp assessment of someone who knew what to look for. "You have good land here," he said without preamble. "Good water, good grass. Your grandfather chose well." "He did," Georgia agreed, "though maintaining it is harder than I expected." Zachary tied his horse to the rail and turned to face her fully. In the clear afternoon light, she could see him even better than she had in town. His face was all hard angles and weathered planes, with a scar running through his left eyebrow that suggested a past encounter that had not gone well for someone. But his eyes held intelligence and something else, a kind of loneliness that Georgia recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "Show me around?" he asked. They spent the next 2 hours walking the ranch. Georgia pointed out the fence lines that needed repair, the section of barn roof that leaked, the corral gate that hung crooked on its hinges. Zachary said little, but she could see him cataloging everything, his mind working behind those watchful eyes. Miguel joined them partway through, and there was a moment when the two men sized each other up in that way men had, some silent communication passing between them. Then, Miguel gave a small nod, and Zachary returned it, and apparently some understanding had been reached. "Your biggest vulnerability is the approach from the north," Zachary said, pointing toward a gap in the hills where the land opened up. "Someone wanting to hit the ranch fast would come through there, following the creek bed for cover." "We would hear them coming," Georgia said. Maybe not if they came at dusk or dawn when you were busy with chores." He turned in a slow circle, his gaze taking in the entire valley. "You need an early warning system, bells on the fences maybe, or tripwires set up along likely approaches." "I do not want to live in a fortress," Georgia protested. "You would rather live as an easy target?" The bluntness of his words stung, but Georgia could not argue with the truth in them. "Fine. What do you suggest?" What followed was a practical discussion of ranch security, with Miguel contributing his own observations. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they had a plan. Zachary would return in 2 days with supplies to set up basic perimeter warnings. He would also check in 3 times a week, varying his schedule so there was no predictable pattern. "I appreciate this," Georgia said as Zachary prepared to leave, "but I cannot pay you much. The ranch is not exactly prosperous right now." "Did not ask for payment. Everyone needs something." Zachary swung up into his saddle with fluid ease, looking down at her from his horse's back. "Your father helped me when I needed it, expected nothing in return. I am doing the same. That is all there is to it." He rode out before Georgia could respond, leaving her standing in the yard with a strange mix of gratitude and frustration swirling in her chest. She was not used to accepting help, not used to trusting anyone outside of Miguel. But something about Zachary Hawthorne felt different. He did not want anything from her except to honor a debt, and that was a kind of honesty she could respect. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Zachary arrived at the ranch, worked alongside Georgia and Miguel on whatever needed doing, then disappeared back into his mountains. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He repaired fences with hands that knew the work intimately, set up perimeter warnings with the precision of someone who understood predator behavior, and taught Georgia tricks for reading the land that her father had never known. More than that, he treated her like a partner in the work rather than someone to be protected and coddled. When she suggested a better way to brace a fence post, he listened and incorporated her idea. When she questioned his placement of a warning bell, he explained his reasoning without condescension. It was a kind of respect Georgia had rarely experienced from men, and she found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with ranch security. Miguel noticed, of course. He said nothing, but Georgia caught him watching her with knowing eyes when she took extra care with her appearance on days Zachary was expected. She told herself it was simple vanity, wanting to look presentable rather than like something the cat dragged in. But the truth was harder to ignore when she caught her own reflection in the window, saw the color in her cheeks and the brightness in her eyes that had been missing for months. 2 weeks after their first meeting, everything changed. Georgia was in the barn at dusk, checking on a cow that had been acting poorly all day. Miguel had gone to bed early, complaining of aching joints, and she had insisted he rest while she handled the evening chores. The cow seemed better, munching hay with reasonable enthusiasm, and Georgia was just latching the stall when she heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed the rifle she kept near the barn door and moved to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. 6 riders approached from the north, exactly as Zachary had predicted, following the creek bed until they broke out into the open valley. The warning bells Zachary had set up suddenly clanged to life, their sound shrill in the evening air. The riders heard it too, and their pace increased from a trot to a gallop. Georgia's mind raced. She could barricade herself in the barn, but that left Miguel vulnerable in the house. She could make a run for the house, but she would be exposed and outnumbered. Every option felt like a losing proposition. Then another sound cut through the twilight. A single rifle shot, fired high, meant as a warning rather than to kill. The riders pulled up short, their horses dancing nervously as a 7th rider appeared on the ridge to the north. Even in the dim light, Georgia recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette of Zachary Hawthorne. He sat his horse with absolute stillness, his rifle resting across his saddle, and even from a distance, she could feel the threat he represented. "This is private land," Zachary's voice carried across the valley, deep and hard as granite. "You are not welcome here." One of the riders, a man in a battered Confederate coat, laughed. "We are just passing through, friend. No need for trouble." "Then you will pass through somewhere else." Zachary levered another round into his rifle, the metallic sound loud and deliberate. "This ranch is under my protection. Anyone who wants to test that can try their luck." The riders exchanged glances. Georgia could practically see them calculating odds, weighing their options. 7 men against 1 should have been easy numbers, but there was something about Zachary, the absolute confidence in his posture, that gave them pause. The man in the Confederate coat spat into the dirt. "We will remember this." "You do that." For a long moment nobody moved. Then the leader wheeled his horse around and the gang followed, disappearing back the way they had come, with considerably less confidence than they had arrived with. Zachary remained on the ridge until they were completely out of sight, then urged his horse down toward the ranch. Georgia met him in the yard, her legs shaking with reaction, but her rifle still held steady. "How did you know?" "I did not," Zachary dismounted, his face grim. "But I have been keeping an eye on the territory, tracking signs of the gang moving through. Saw evidence this afternoon that they were heading this direction and figured it was better to be cautious. You could have been killed. It was 6 against 1. 7 against 1, actually. You were in the barn with a rifle." He looked at her directly, and there was something fierce in his amber eyes. "But I have dealt with men like that before. Most of them are cowards at heart. They prey on the weak and run from anyone who stands up to them." Miguel emerged from the house, moving faster than Georgia had seen him move in months, his own rifle in hand. "I heard the shots. Are you both all right?" "We are fine," Georgia assured him, "thanks to Zachary." "They will come back," Miguel said grimly. "Men like that do not forget." "Maybe," Zachary agreed, "but not tonight. And when they do, we will be ready." "We," Georgia repeated. Zachary looked at her steadily. "I will be moving my camp closer to the ranch for a while. There's a spot up in the rocks overlooking this valley. Gives a good view of anyone approaching. I can keep watch from there." "You cannot just give up your life to watch over us," Georgia protested. "I am not giving up anything. The high country will still be there when this is done. Right now you need help, and I am offering it." His voice gentled slightly. "Let me do this, Georgia. Please." The use of her name, the genuine concern in his voice, broke through George's defenses. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch and knowing that somewhere up in the rocks, Zachary Hawthorne kept watch. The thought should have made her feel protected, perhaps even owned, but instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt seen, valued, as if her safety mattered to someone beyond just duty or debt. It was a dangerous feeling, Georgia knew. She had built walls around her heart for good reason, had learned through bitter experience that men were not to be trusted with vulnerable things like hope and affection. But Zachary was unlike any man she had ever known, and those carefully constructed walls were beginning to show cracks. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of trouble. Georgia went about her chores with one eye always on the horizon, alert for any sign of returning raiders. Around mid-morning, Zachary appeared, leading his horse and carrying a string of rabbits. "Thought you could use some fresh meat," he said, offering the rabbits to Miguel, who had emerged to greet him. "You are a good man, Zachary Hawthorne," Miguel said simply, taking the rabbits. "I will make us a stew." Zachary helped Georgia with the day's work, and this time there was an ease between them that had not existed before. Shared danger had forged a connection, breaking down the formal distance they had maintained. They talked while they worked, and Georgia found herself sharing things she had told no one else. About how she had turned away suitors, not because she was too proud or too particular, but because none of them had seen her as anything more than a means to acquire land. About how the town's mockery cut deeper than she let on, making her question her own worth. "They are fools," Zachary said, echoing Miguel's words from days before. But then he added something that made George's breath catch. "Any man worth his salt would count himself lucky to know you, let alone court you. You do not know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough." He paused in his work, turning to face her fully. "I have seen you face down danger with courage, work from dawn to dusk without complaint, show loyalty to the people who depend on you. I have seen you stubborn and proud and determined, refusing to let circumstance break you. Those are not small things, Georgia." No one had ever spoken to her like that with such plain sincerity. Georgia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun overhead. "I am just doing what needs to be done, nothing special about that." "That is where you are wrong." Zachary's amber eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart pound. "There is everything special about it." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Miguel called from the house that the noon meal was ready, and the spell broke. But something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed, and Georgia knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same. Over the following weeks, the pattern of their days took on a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Zachary arrived each morning and worked alongside Georgia and Miguel, his strength and skill making tasks that had been nearly impossible suddenly manageable. He reinforced the barn, repaired the house roof, and helped round up strays that had wandered far from the main herd. But more than the physical labor, he brought something else to the ranch: life, conversation. The sound of his deep laugh when Miguel told stories about the old days. The sight of his broad back bent over a task, muscles flexing beneath his shirt in ways that made George's mouth go dry. The quiet moments at day's end when they sat on the porch and watched the sun paint the mountains gold, not talking, just being together in comfortable silence. The town noticed, of course. On her rare trips into Chico, Georgia endured knowing looks and whispered speculation. Let them talk, she thought. Their opinions had never mattered before, and they certainly did not matter now when she had finally found something that made her happy. Because she was happy, Georgia realized with some surprise. For the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, she woke each morning with anticipation rather than dread. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling for no reason, feeling light in a way she had forgotten was possible. Miguel saw it and approved with grandfatherly satisfaction. He is a good man, the old ranch hand said one evening while they prepared supper. Your father would have liked him. Papa did like him, Georgia reminded him. He helped Zachary when he was injured. No, he would have liked him for you. Miguel's dark eyes were knowing. I see how you look at each other, like two people circling something both frightening and wonderful. Georgia's hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. I do not know what you mean. Yes, you do. Miguel's voice was gentle. You have spent so long protecting yourself, building walls to keep people out. But walls that keep pain out also keep joy out. Zachary is offering you something precious. Do not let fear make you refuse it. I barely know him, Georgia protested weakly. You know his character. You know his heart. The rest is just details. Miguel touched her shoulder gently. Your mother? God rest her soul, she would want you to be happy. Your father, too. They would not want you to spend your life alone out of some misplaced sense of duty or fear of what others think. The words stayed with Georgia long after Miguel had gone to bed. She sat on the porch alone, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill, and thought about happiness and fear and the cost of keeping her heart locked away. Somewhere up in the rocks, Zachary kept his vigil, and Georgia wondered if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. The answer came 2 nights later, in a way that changed everything. Georgia woke to the sound of gunfire, not the single warning shot Zachary had fired before, but a sustained exchange that spoke of real combat. She grabbed her rifle and rushed outside in her nightdress, her heart hammering in her chest. The scene that greeted her was chaos. The Crimson Creek gang had returned, all 7 of them, but this time they had not approached from the expected direction. They had circled around, coming at the ranch from the west, where the hills provided cover, and they had nearly made it to the house before Zachary spotted them. Now he was pinned down behind the water trough, exchanging fire with 4 of the gang members while the other 3 tried to flank him. Even in the darkness lit only by moonlight and muzzle flashes, Georgia could see he was outnumbered and in serious trouble. She did not hesitate. She brought her rifle up and fired at the closest gang member, the shot going wide but close enough to make him dive for cover. It gave Zachary the opening he needed to shift position, rolling behind the corner of the barn where he had better protection. "Get back inside," he shouted at her. "Not a chance." Georgia fired again, this time clipping one of the gang members in the shoulder. He yelped and retreated, clutching his arm. Miguel appeared at her side, his own rifle barking. The old man might have been pushing 70, but his aim was still true. Another gang member went down, not dead but injured enough to be out of the fight. The odds had shifted from 7 against 1 to 5 against 3. And suddenly, the gang did not seem so confident. Their leader, the man in the Confederate coat, realized his easy target had turned into a real battle, and he made the calculation that survival was more important than revenge. "Fall back," he shouted, and the remaining gang members retreated to their horses. But as they fled, the leader turned and fired one last shot, not at Zachary or Miguel, but directly at Georgia. She saw the muzzle flash, felt the bullet pass so close to her head that it stirred her hair, and then Zachary was there. He had crossed the yard in a dead run and tackled her to the ground, covering her body with his own as more shots rang out. The impact drove the air from her lungs, but she was aware of the solid weight of him above her, the rapid beat of his heart against her shoulder, the way his arms wrapped around her head to protect it. Then, silence. The gang was gone, disappearing into the darkness, and it was over. Zachary did not move immediately. He stayed where he was, his breath harsh in her ear, his whole body trembling with reaction. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her arms and shoulders, checking for injury. "Did they hit you?" "I'm fine," Georgia managed. "They missed." "Missed?" His voice broke on the word. "That was not missing. That was inches. You could have been killed." He pulled back enough to look at her, and in the moonlight Georgia could see his face clearly. All the careful control he usually maintained was gone, stripped away to reveal raw emotion underneath, fear, fury, and something else, something that made her breath catch and her heart stutter. "You could have been killed," he repeated, and his hands came up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted his obvious distress. "Georgia, He did not finish the sentence with words. Instead, he kissed her. It was not gentle or careful. It was desperate and fierce, full of all the fear and relief and emotions neither of them had dared to name. Georgia froze for half a heartbeat, shocked, and then she was kissing him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. Time stopped. The world narrowed to just the two of them, to the taste of him and the feel of his calloused hands against her face and the way he kissed her like she was precious beyond measure. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Zachary pressed his forehead against hers. "I cannot do this anymore," he said roughly. "I cannot pretend I am here just to honor a debt. I cannot watch you risk your life and act like it does not tear me apart inside." "Zachary," Georgia whispered, her own emotions threatening to overflow. "I love you," he said, the words stark and simple. "I have loved you since the day you stood in that general store with your spine straight and your eyes fierce, refusing to let small-minded people break you. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you face each day like a warrior. And I know I have no right to say it, know I am just a mountain man with nothing to offer but rough hands in a lonely cabin, but I cannot hold it in anymore." Georgia felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. 25 years she had waited, 25 years of being told she was too old, too strange, too independent, 25 years of wondering if something was wrong with her, because no man had ever looked at her with anything resembling real love. And now, here was Zachary Hawthorne, this man of few words and abundant actions, offering her everything she had never dared to hope for. "I love you too," she said, and watched his amber eyes go wide with shock and wonder. "I think I have loved you since you looked at me like I was capable rather than damaged, since you treated me like a partner instead of a burden, since you made me laugh and feel safe, and remember what it is like to hope for something beyond just survival." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. When they finally pulled apart, Miguel was standing on the porch with his rifle in one hand and a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "About time," the old man said. "Now someone help me drag these idiots to the barn so we can tie them up before they wake." It took Georgia a moment to realize what Miguel meant. 2 of the gang members had not escaped, too injured to make it to their horses. They lay unconscious in the yard and would need to be secured until they could be turned over to the law. The practical concerns of life intruded on the moment, but Georgia found she did not mind. She had spent enough of her life alone and lonely. There would be time later for more kisses, more whispered confessions, more of the intimacy that came with being truly known by another person. For now, there was work to do, and she did it side by side with the man she loved. The next morning, Miguel rode into Chico to fetch the sheriff while Georgia and Zachary kept watch over their prisoners. The 2 gang members, once they woke and realized their situation, were more than happy to talk. They confirmed that the Crimson Creek gang had been targeting isolated ranches and that their leader had taken the failed raid on the Dalton place as a personal insult. He would be back, they warned, with reinforcements. "Let him come," Zachary said flatly. "This time, we will be ready." When the sheriff finally arrived with Miguel, he took custody of the prisoners and listened to the full story with increasing concern. "The Crimson Creek gang has been a thorn in our side for months," Sheriff Cooper said, a grizzled man in his 50s with more common sense than most lawmen Georgia had encountered. "These 2 will hang, no question. But you are right that the leader will want revenge. Might be time to consider stronger measures." "What kind of measures?" Georgia asked. "I could deputize some men, set up a proper watch on your ranch. Make it clear we are taking this seriously." "That would require you to care about an isolated ranch run by a woman," Georgia said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Forgive me if I doubt your sudden concern." Sheriff Cooper had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I will admit the town has not treated you fairly, Miss Dalton. But this is bigger than personal grievances. If the gang is bold enough to attack a ranch this close to Chico, they will get bolder still. We need to stop them now." What followed was a tense negotiation. In the end, Sheriff Cooper agreed to organize a group of deputized men to help fortify the ranch and set up a rotation of guards. Zachary made it clear he would be staying regardless of what the law decided, his tone brooking no argument. "Are you her husband?" Sheriff Cooper asked bluntly. "Not yet," Zachary replied, and looked directly at Georgia. "But I intend to be, if she will have me." The words, spoken in front of the sheriff and Miguel and God and everyone, made Georgia's heart soar, but she also knew the practical realities of their situation. "We have known each other less than a month," she pointed out. "I have known you long enough," Zachary said, "but I will wait as long as you need me to wait. Just know that I'm not going anywhere." Sheriff Cooper looked between them and shook his head. "Well, I suppose that settles the question of who has authority over this ranch's defense. Congratulations on your impending nuptials, I guess." After the sheriff left, taking the prisoners and Miguel with him to give proper statements in town, Georgia and Zachary were finally alone. They stood in the yard where he had kissed her the night before, the morning sun bright overhead, and looked at each other with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "Did you mean it?" Georgia asked. "About wanting to marry me?" "Every word." Zachary stepped closer, his hands finding hers. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I am 32 years old, Georgia, and I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you. When I thought that bullet might have hit you, when I saw you in danger." He stopped, his jaw working. "I knew in that moment I could not live without you. Not because you need me to protect you, but because you make my life better just by being in it." "I am 25 and I have never been courted," Georgia said softly. "I do not know how to do this, how to be someone's wife. I have spent so long being alone that I am not sure I know how to be part of a pair. Then we will figure it out together." Zachary brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her ache. "I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. I fell in love with you. Georgia Dalton. The woman who faces down outlaws in her nightdress, who runs a ranch like it is her religion, who looks at the world with fierce independence and refuses to bend. I do not want to change you. I just want to stand beside you while you keep being exactly who you are." You make it sound simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we have been taught to think love has to be complicated. But maybe it is just finding someone who sees you clearly and loves what they see. Georgia thought about his words, about the town women who had mocked her for being untouched at 25, as if her worth was measured only in whether a man had claimed her. She thought about the suitors who had looked at her land with greedy eyes and never really seen her at all. And she thought about Zachary, who had stood up against 7 armed men to protect her, who worked alongside her as an equal, who kissed her like she was precious beyond price. "All right," she said, "yes, I will marry you." The joy that lit Zachary's face was worth every lonely year, every mocking word, every moment of doubt. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight, and when he set her down, he kissed her with a thoroughness that left her dizzy. "We should probably wait a bit," Georgia said when she could breathe again. "Make sure we are both certain. Make sure this is not just fear and adrenaline making us reckless." "We can wait as long as you want," Zachary agreed. "But I am already certain. I was certain the moment I saw you in Henderson's store, looking like you wanted to shoot something, refusing to let the world beat you down. That is a strange moment to fall in love with someone. Maybe, but I've always been a strange man." He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I live in the mountains, talk to trees, and prefer the company of wild things to most people. You deserve to know what you are getting into." "I think I know exactly what I'm getting into," Georgia said, "and I want it anyway." They spent the rest of the day making plans, practical and otherwise. Zachary would officially move from his mountain cabin to the ranch, taking up residence in the barn until they were properly married. Miguel, when he returned, approved wholeheartedly and immediately began planning how to expand the house to accommodate a married couple and potentially, eventually, a family. "You're getting ahead of yourself," Georgia protested, blushing. "I am old," Miguel replied with a grin. "I want to see great-grandchildren before I die. I am not your granddaughter. You are as close as I have got. I will claim you if I want to." The affection in his voice made Georgia's eyes sting with tears. Miguel had been more than an employee. He had been family when her own family dwindled to nothing. The idea that he would live to see her happy, to see her settled and loved, felt like a gift she had not known she desperately wanted to give him. Over the next week, true to Sheriff Cooper's word, deputized men arrived to help fortify the ranch. Some of them were townsmen Georgia barely knew. Others were ranchers from neighboring properties who had their own reasons to want the Crimson Creek gang stopped. They worked together to build watchtowers, reinforce fences, and create a system of signals that would allow them to call for help quickly if needed. Not everyone was friendly. Some of the men made it clear they thought Georgia was trouble, that a woman running a ranch had invited this kind of attention. But Zachary shut down that talk quickly and decisively, his size and reputation enough to make even the most skeptical man think twice before speaking ill of her. "They are idiots," he told Georgia one evening after a particularly tense day. "But they are armed idiots who are willing to help defend your land. We will take what we can get and ignore the rest." "I am used to people thinking poorly of me," Georgia said. "You should not have to be used to it." Zachary pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a way that made her feel safe and cherished. "Once this is over, once we are married, we can decide how much time we want to spend in town versus keeping to ourselves. I have spent 8 years mostly alone. I am comfortable with that life if you are." The idea of building a life together, just the two of them against the world, held enormous appeal. But Georgia also knew she could not let fear or other people's opinions dictate how she lived. "I want to hold my head high," she said. "I want to walk into that general store as your wife and dare anyone to say a word. I want them to see that I am loved and chosen, that there was never anything wrong with me." "There was never anything wrong with you," Zachary said fiercely, "but I understand wanting to prove it. We will do that together." 3 weeks after the first attack, the Crimson Creek gang made their final move. This time, they came in force, nearly 20 men riding hard toward the Dalton ranch with clear intent to overwhelm any defense. But this time, the ranch was ready. The watchtowers spotted them miles out and signal fires went up immediately. Within an hour, every deputized man for 10 miles around had converged on the ranch, turning it into an armed fortress. Sheriff Cooper himself led the defense, positioning men strategically and making it clear that this would be the gang's last raid. The battle, when it came, was fierce but brief. The Crimson Creek gang had expected an easy target and instead found coordinated resistance. Caught in crossfire from multiple positions, outnumbered and outgunned, they broke and scattered. Some were captured, others fled into the mountains where Zachary promised to track them down later, and their leader, the man in the Confederate coat, died with his boots on just as he probably always expected. When the smoke cleared and the last shots faded into silence, Georgia stood in the yard of her ranch, surrounded by evidence of violence but alive and whole. Zachary found her there, checking her for injuries with hands that trembled slightly despite his attempt at calm. "It is over," he said. "Really over this time." "Is it?" Georgia looked at the damage to her property, the scars that would take time to heal. "They will just send the story around, the woman who brought trouble to the whole county. They will send the story around of the woman who stood her ground and won," Zachary corrected. "The woman who defended her land and her people and came out the other side stronger. Let them talk, Georgia. Let them say whatever they want." "We know the truth," Sheriff Cooper approached, looking tired but satisfied. "The gang's finished. We got most of them captured, and the ones who fled will not come back to this territory. Your ranch is safe, Miss Dalton." "Thank you, Sheriff." "I owe you an apology," Cooper said gruffly. "The town does too, though I doubt most of them will be brave enough to say it. You have been treated poorly for no good reason, and it took a crisis to make us see what we should have seen all along. You are a strong woman, good with land and livestock, loyal to the people who matter. Any community would be lucky to have you." The apology, sincere and unexpected, cracked something open in Georgia's chest. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Cooper tipped his hat before moving off to organize his men. "That must have cost him something to say," Zachary observed. "Probably did." Georgia leaned into him, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. "Do you think it will change anything? The way people see me?" "Some people, maybe. Others will stay stuck in their small thinking. But it does not matter, Georgia. You do not need their approval to know your worth." "I know, but it would be nice anyway. Then we will give them something to really talk about." Zachary tilted her face up to his amber eyes warm. "Marry me. Not in some distant future when everything is perfect and settled, but soon. Next week, if the preacher is available. Let the whole town see that you are chosen and loved, and let anyone who ever mocked you choke on their own words." Georgia felt a fierce smile spread across her face. "Yes, next week. Let us give them something to talk about." The wedding took place 7 days later in the small church at the center of Chico. Georgia wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and carried wildflowers picked from her own land. Miguel walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, and Zachary waited at the altar looking like he had been carved from stone, his long hair tied back and his eyes never leaving her face. The church was packed. Some came out of genuine affection, others out of curiosity, but Georgia found she did not care about motivations. She was marrying the man she loved, and that was all that mattered. The preacher kept the ceremony brief, perhaps sensing that neither bride nor groom were interested in lengthy speeches. When he pronounced them husband and wife, and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, the mountain man needed no further encouragement. He kissed Georgia thoroughly, possessively, in front of God and the whole town, making it absolutely clear that she was his and he was hers. The reception afterward was held at the ranch, with long tables set up in the yard and more food than seemed possible for such a hastily planned event. Miguel had called in every favor he had accumulated over 40 years, and the result was a feast that spoke of genuine community support. Mrs. Henderson approached Georgia during the celebration, her face stiff but her words carefully chosen. "I owe you an apology, Miss Dalton. Mrs. Hawthorne, I should say. I spoke cruelly about you, and it was wrong. You are a strong woman, and your husband is lucky to have you." It was not a fulsome apology, but Georgia recognized the effort it took. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate you saying so." Other women followed, some apologizing, others simply offering congratulations, and Georgia accepted it all with grace. She was done letting other people's opinions wound her. She had everything she needed right here, a man who loved her fiercely, a home that was truly hers, and a future that looked bright for the first time in memory. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Zachary pulled Georgia away from the crowd. They walked to the edge of the yard where they could see the mountains rising dark against the twilight sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "So happy I can hardly believe it is real," Georgia admitted. 6 weeks ago I was alone and certain I always would be. Now I have you, and it feels like my entire life has changed." "Our lives," Zachary corrected. "Our life together. Everything I have, everything I am, belongs to you now." "That works both ways." "I know." He kissed her temple, gentle and reverent. "I keep thinking about what those women said in the store that first day, about you being 25 and untouched, like it was some kind of failure." "It hurt," Georgia confessed. "Even though I knew they were wrong, it hurt. They were completely wrong. You were waiting for the right person, and there's nothing shameful in that. You were worth waiting for, and I am honored to be the man you chose." He paused, his voice going rougher. "I will be your first, Georgia. Your only. And I will spend every day of our lives making sure you never regret choosing me." The intimacy in his words made Georgia's breath catch. Tonight would be her wedding night, the first time she would lie with a man, and she was surprised to find she felt no fear. Just anticipation, warm and sweet, for this next step in their journey together. "I could never regret choosing you," she said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood together as darkness fell completely, and stars began to emerge overhead. Tomorrow they would return to the work of running the ranch, to the practical realities of building a life together. But tonight was for celebration, for joy, for the beginning of something beautiful. Much later, after the guests had departed and Miguel had discreetly retired to his own quarters, Zachary carried Georgia over the threshold of the house they now shared. He set her down gently in the bedroom that had been hers alone for 25 years and would now be theirs together. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his hands gentle on her shoulders. A little," Georgia admitted, "but mostly I'm excited. I trust you, Zachary." "I will be gentle," he promised. "We will take this as slow as you need." What followed was tender and sweet, with Zachary proving true to his word about gentleness. He took his time, showing Georgia with actions as well as words how precious she was to him, and when they finally came together, it felt right and natural, like this was always how it was meant to be. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his broad chest, Georgia felt a peace she had never known. This was what it meant to be loved completely, to be known and chosen and treasured. All the years of loneliness, all the mockery and doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Zachary replied, his arms tightening around her. "My wife, my Georgia, my only one." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, growing from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the county. Zachary's knowledge of the land and George's business sense proved to be a powerful combination, and within 5 years they had tripled their cattle herd and added horses to their operation. Miguel lived another 12 years, long enough to see the arrival of 3 grandchildren, as he insisted on calling them. First came a son, Samuel, strong and healthy with his father's amber eyes. 2 years later, twin girls arrived, Ellen and Rose, who inherited their mother's determination and their father's wanderlust. The town's attitude toward Georgia shifted gradually from grudging acceptance to genuine respect. She became known as a woman of capability and fairness, someone who paid her debts and helped her neighbors when they needed it. The women who had once mocked her found themselves coming to her for advice on everything from managing household accounts to dealing with difficult husbands. Zachary never fully lost his mountain man ways. He still disappeared into the high country for weeks at a time, though now Georgia often went with him, leaving the ranch in the capable hands of the crew they had hired. Those trips became some of her most treasured memories, sleeping under stars, learning to read the land the way Zachary did, existing in a world that was just the two of them and endless wilderness. On their 10th anniversary, sitting on the porch of the expanded house they had built together, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains, Georgia reflected on how completely her life had transformed. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, his hand finding hers. "About that day in Henderson's store," Georgia said. "About those women who mocked me for being 25 and untouched. About how certain I was that I would always be alone." "Regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "Not a single one, except maybe that I did not punch Mrs. Henderson in her smug face." Zachary's laugh boomed across the yard, startling the children and making them giggle. "There is still time. I'm a respectable married woman now. I have a reputation to maintain." "You've never cared about reputation." "True." Georgia leaned into him, content. "I'm glad I waited. Glad I did not settle for someone who saw me as less than I was. Those women were right that I was 25 and untouched, but they were wrong about it being shameful. I was just waiting for you." "And I am glad I was worth waiting for," Zachary said softly. "You made me want to be part of the world again, Georgia. Before you, I was content to hide in my mountains and avoid people. You reminded me that life is better when it is shared." Their son Samuel came running up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Papa, can you teach me to track like you promised? Ellen says girls can track too, and I said maybe, but you would know for sure." "Girls can absolutely track," Zachary said seriously. "Your mother tracked a wounded elk for 2 days when she was pregnant with you. Never let anyone tell you girls cannot do something just because some fool man thinks only men are capable." Samuel absorbed this information with the gravity it deserved, then ran back to report to his sisters. Georgia watched them go, her heart full to bursting. "We made good children," she observed. "We did. Smart, strong, and stubborn as mules. They get that from you. They get it from both of us." Georgia turned to kiss her husband, still marveling after 10 years that he was hers. "Thank you for choosing me, Zachary Hawthorne. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, "for taking a chance on a mountain man who had no idea how to court a woman properly, but knew he had found something precious when he saw it." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence and in each other. The ranch around them was quiet, settled for the night, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. But for now, this moment was enough. This life they had built together, against all odds and other people's expectations, was enough. Georgia had been 25 and untouched, mocked by small-minded people who could not see her worth. But Zachary Hawthorne had seen it, had claimed her as his only one, and together they had built something beautiful. A love story that started with cruelty and danger, but transformed into partnership, passion, and a lifetime of choosing each other every single day. Years later, when Samuel brought home a young woman he wanted to marry and asked his mother for advice, Georgia thought carefully before answering. "Love is not about settling or accepting less than you deserve," she said. "It is about finding someone who sees you clearly, all your strengths and flaws, and chooses you anyway. Someone who makes you better by being themselves, not by trying to change you into something you are not. Wait for that person, Samuel. Wait for someone who makes you feel the way your father made me feel the day he told me I was worth fighting for." Samuel, wise beyond his years thanks to parents who had never lied to him about the hardships of life, nodded thoughtfully. "I think Margaret might be that person. She wants to be a doctor, Mama, not a nurse, a real doctor. And she's not afraid of what people will say about it." Georgia smiled, seeing shadows of herself in this young woman she had not yet met. "Then she sounds perfect for you. Bring her to meet us properly. I think your father and I will like her very much." The wedding that followed was joyous, and Georgia watched her son marry his strong-minded bride with a sense of rightness. The cycle continued, she thought, each generation finding love in their own way, building on the foundation laid by those who came before. Ellen and Rose grew into formidable women in their own right. Ellen became a rancher like her parents, eventually taking over the Dalton Hawthorne ranch when Georgia and Zachary decided to spend more time in the mountains they both loved. Rose became a schoolteacher, fierce in her determination to educate children regardless of their gender or background, and married a quiet man who supported her passion without trying to diminish it. And through it all, Georgia and Zachary remained the center of their family, the love that had started in crisis and mockery growing deeper and richer with each passing year. They aged together, Zachary's hair going fully silver while Georgia's retained streaks of auburn, their hands growing weathered but always finding each other. On their 40th anniversary, they returned to the high country where Zachary had first made his home. The cabin still stood, maintained over the years as a retreat, and they spent a week there alone, just the two of them and the wilderness. "I never thought I would live to see this," Georgia said one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in impossible colors. 40 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, and more probably on the way. A ranch that thrives, a family that loves each other. It feels like a dream. "It is real," Zachary assured her, his arm around her shoulders. "We made it real through hard work and stubbornness and refusing to let the world tell us who we should be. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? That I was worth 10 of those women mocking me? I remember everything about that day. The way you looked, all fire and pride. The way you met my eyes without fear. I knew then you were special." "I was just angry," Georgia protested. "You were magnificent." Zachary turned her to face him, his amber eyes still as sharp and warm as they had been 4 decades ago. "You have been magnificent every day since. You made me believe in love, Georgia. Made me believe I could have more than just a lonely existence in the mountains. You gave me a life, a family, a reason to be part of the world." "And you gave me everything I never dared hope for," Georgia replied, tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. "You gave me love and respect and partnership. You saw me as I truly was and loved me for it, not despite it. How do I thank you for that?" "You do not need to thank me. You have given me the same thing and more." He kissed her, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of shared history. "You were 25 and untouched when I met you, and those foolish women mocked you for it. But I knew the truth. You were waiting for something real, and I was honored to be the man you chose. You have been my only one, Georgia, from that day to this, and you will be until my last breath." "And you have been mine," she whispered, "my only one, always." They stayed in the mountains for another week, reliving their youth and marveling at how far they had come. When they finally returned to the ranch, their family greeted them with joy and celebration, and Georgia looked around at the life they had built with profound gratitude. She had been mocked for being untouched at 25, treated like something was wrong with her for not settling for less than she deserved. But she had waited, and the wait had been worth it. She had found Zachary Hawthorne, the mountain man who had seen her worth when no one else did, who had claimed her as his only one and built a love that lasted a lifetime. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the mockery or the doubts, not the struggles or the dangers they had faced. Just the love, deep and true and everlasting, that had transformed two lonely people into something greater than themselves. Their story became legend in Chico, California, passed down through generations as an example of what real love looked like. The woman who waited and the mountain man who claimed her, building an empire through loyalty and hard work and refusing to let the world define them. And when Georgia finally passed at the age of 83, with Zachary holding her hand and their entire family surrounding them, her last words were simple and true. "Thank you for being my only one." Zachary followed her 6 months later, unable to exist in a world without his beloved Georgia. They were buried together on the ranch they had built, under the shadow of the mountains they both loved, and their gravestone bore a simple inscription, "Georgia and Zachary Hawthorne." She waited for love, he gave her forever. Two souls, one heart, always their children and grandchildren continued the work they had started, building on the foundation of love and respect and partnership that Georgia and Zachary had modeled their entire lives. And when anyone in the family faced doubt or mockery or pressure to settle for less than they deserved, they were told the story of their ancestor who had been 25 and untouched, mocked by small-minded people until a mountain man had seen her worth and claimed her as his only one. It became a reminder that love was worth waiting for, that the right person would see you clearly and choose you anyway, and that building something real took courage and patience and a willingness to fight for what mattered. Georgia and Zachary's love story was not just their own. It became a legacy, a promise passed down through generations that true love existed, that waiting was not weakness, and that the right person was always worth the wait. And in the mountains above Chico, California, where Zachary had first made his home, and where Georgia had learned to love the wilderness as much as her ranch, the wind still whispered through the trees, carrying the echo of a promise made long ago. "Then I will be her only one." A promise kept, a love honored, a legacy that would never fade. The end.